أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back to our next installment in the exegesis, the commentary of the Noble Quran. Today our discussion will be the very last surah, the very last chapter of the Quran, chapter number 114, known as Surah al-Naas, also known in the English as the chapter of mankind or of humanity. Before we delve into the discussion of this chapter, let us have a brief overview of the outline of our discussion for today. We will look at the following topics. General details about this chapter, the history of revelation, benefits of recitation, the chapter at a glance by reviewing the Arabic and the English translation, and follow that by a verse-by-verse exegesis of Surah al-Naas. As for the general information of this chapter, for those who went through our discussion of Surah al-Falaq, chapter number 113, you'll recall that we referred and we mentioned that these two chapters, 113 and 114, are known and referred to as the al-Mu'awwidhatayn. That is, those two chapters of the Quran that begin with the phrase Qul A'udhu, in which the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him and his family, and as an extension, his followers, have been asked to seek refuge, to seek protection in Allah. And because this word A'udhu has been used in both of these chapters, this is why the scholars of the Quran refer to both chapter 113 and 114 as al-Mu'awwidhatayn. And so we mentioned that in the last chapter, and that is also repeated in this particular surah of the Quran. Looking at some more of the further general details of this chapter of the Quran, we see that this was also revealed in Mecca, that this surah has 6 verses to it, 6 ayat, and that in this short passage of the Quran, the Prophet of Islam and as an extension, the followers of this Prophet have been asked, have been required to seek refuge in Allah from certain things that are around us that may cause a believer harm and difficulty. When we come to the traditions on the history of the revelation of this particular surah of the Quran, some commentators mention that the Prophet actually had fallen ill due to some magic or witchcraft or sorcery. And when the Prophet fell ill, then the angel Gabriel came to the blessed Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him and his family, and brought him down this chapter to cure him of the sickness. This, however, as we should mention, is not a view which is accepted by all of the Shia scholars, the scholars who follow the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad through his family, the Ahlul Bayt, may God's peace and blessings be upon them all. Because they tell us that prophets of God should be immune, should be protected from all forms of such sicknesses, especially where it comes to magic, witchcraft, and sorcery. And so we mention this just in passing, that if you were to read this opinion in other commentaries of the Quran, that this is not the widely accepted understanding of why this chapter came down to the blessed heart of the Prophet Muhammad. However, going from here, let us look at some of the benefits of the recitation of this surah. In terms of the benefits of recitation, we have 3 traditions which we wish to share. One of them we spoke about in our previous discussion of Surah al-Falaq, in which the 5th Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, mentions that the individual who recites Surah al-Falaq, Surah al-Naas, and Surah al-Ikhlas in their witr prayers, that is their night prayers, that they would be addressed by God and they will be told, O servant of God, indeed be advised that God has accepted your witr prayers. So we see that one of the benefits of its recitation is contained within the recommended recitation of the night prayer, the night vigil, and that these 3 chapters, namely chapter number 109, chapter number 112, 113, and 114 have been recommended, have been advised to be recited in the night prayer, and that Allah will address the individual as one whose prayers have been accepted by him. In another tradition, also from the 5th Imam, he tells us that before a person goes to bed, he or she should recite 3 passages of the Noble Quran. One is Surah al-Falaq, chapter 113. The second is Surah al-Naas, chapter 114, and also Ayatul Kursi, which is verse number 255 from Surah al-Baqarah. And the fifth Imam tells us that a person who does so should be protected, will be protected from bad thoughts, nightmares, and such things at night. So this should be one of our common practices of all believers, and we should encourage our family also to take a few minutes before bedtime to recite a bit of the Quran, and most specifically these three passages which have been mentioned in the traditions by the fifth Imam. The last and the final hadith that we want to reflect upon today in terms of the benefits of recitation tells us that any time a part of the body of the noble Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him and his family, would hurt, that he would recite Surah al-Tawheed, Surah al-Ikhlas, that is, Surah al-Falaq, and Surah al-Naas over the right palm of his hand, and then he would rub his hand over that part of the body which hurt, seeking obviously cure and intercession from Allah for a cure in that part of the body which was ailing him. So again, a practical application of this surah of the Quran that we can put forth in our day-to-day life. Let us now listen to the beautiful verses of Surah al-Naas and follow that up with the English translation of this chapter.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس.
In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the sneaky whisperer, who whispers into the hearts of people, from among jinn and among people. In this first very short verse of Surah al-Naas, we see that we have been asked to seek refuge in the Lord of humanity. This verse has a few different points which we want to briefly look at. One is that Allah, God, refers to himself as Rabb in this verse, Rabbun Nas, the Lord of humanity. When we look in the books of lexicon and in the verses of the Quran to see how or what this word Rabb means, we see that many of the usages come in the meaning of, for example, a nurturer, a trainer, one who engages in the upbringing of an individual. And so we address Allah as not only our Lord, as our God, as our Creator, as our Sustainer, but the one who trains and nurtures us onto the path of felicity. And that is perhaps one of the reasons why the word Rabb is used rather than any of the other names of Allah. And Allah refers to himself as Rabbun Nas, the nurturer, the trainer of all of humanity, not just the Muslim community, not just a certain segment of Islam, but rather all of humanity are in one way or another, in one form or another, being nurtured, being trained, being developed by God in the life of this world. Some obviously choose to accept him as their nurturer, as their trainer, as their protector and guide, and others, as we know, Allah leaves them to decide their own fate and to either accept or to reject him. But in either case, Allah refers to himself, and he asks us to call upon him and to seek protection in him from all of the evil elements which we will mention, but he calls himself as the nurturer or the trainer of all of humanity. From here, Allah calls himself the King of humanity. And obviously when we look at it, in today's day and age, we don't have many countries that have kingdoms. But when we look and we study about kingdoms and how they work and how they function, we see that the king is obviously the sovereign authority on the land, and that all of his subjects must, follow and respect his orders and his demands. And so when we call God as the King of humanity, we have in our mind a picture of a king. Obviously not a physical picture, but we have this understanding of the power, the authority, the majesty of a king. But we'll see later on in this chapter how Allah differs from the kings of this world, how he does not resemble in any form in the way he acts, in the way that he passes decree with the kings of the temporal world that we live in. In verse number 3, we then address God as being the God of humanity. Again, we see that he is the only true God. There is nothing or no one or no entity who is worthy of us worshiping and adoring and cherishing him except for the one true God. And therefore Allah calls himself as the God of humanity. Again, even though people may reject him, people may deny the signs and the revelations and the prophets and all of those things which he sent for all of us to be guided to the path of happiness in this life and also in the next. But he still refers to himself as the God of all humanity. If we were to summarize these 3 verses of Surah al-Naas, as the scholars have given us the understanding, we see that they are actually a step-by-step gradual procession, progress in understanding the level of authority that Allah has over us. We see he doesn't just start off by saying he is the sovereign ruler and authority. He doesn't begin his discussion in such a harsh or abrasive fashion. Rather, he starts off by saying he's the Rabb, he is the trainer. So he shows us that he is training us. He is using that love and gentleness and kindness with us. He, just as a trainer would train, for example, a child or anybody who's in any specific field of sports or of education, that you have a trainer above you who nurtures you and guides you in a gentle way to reach your successful outcome. And in the second stage, once Allah refers to himself as this trainer of humanity, he then reminds us that yes, he is the trainer, but he's also the authority, he's also the Malik or the Malik. And just as we have to obey authority in this temporal world, whether it be law enforcement officials or the rules of a country, obviously we also need to obey at a higher level the rules of the true authority, which is Allah. And therefore at the second stage, Allah refers to himself as Malik an-Naas, the authority of all humanity, the true sovereign. But as we mentioned, he does not rule with an iron fist as maybe some kings around the world today rule, where they are free to annihilate, to kill, to destroy their subjects if they so see fit, or if they see their authority being threatened. No, Allah is a king, but he's also a benevolent king. He's a merciful king. He's forgiving. He is one who pardons his subjects when they turn to him and ask for repentance. And so therefore Allah's governorship is not obviously like those of the temporal leaders of this world. The third and final progression in this step of understanding Allah and seeking refuge and protection in him is that we call him the supreme authority. He is the God of all of humanity. And again, we stress upon this fact because this is one of the unwavering beliefs of Islam and one of the foundational pillars of the religion, that there is no other entity, there is nothing in this world which is worthy of our adoration, our fear, our respect, our worship, except for God. And that is the foundational sentence to come into the religion of Islam, to bear witness and testify to the oneness of God. And we have to always keep at the forefront of our mind that he is the God. He is the one who truly deserves to be worshipped and submitted to. In the 4th verse of Surah al-Naas, we seek refuge in God from the evil of the sneaky whisperer. Now, this verse has been interpreted in many different ways over the centuries. Many of our scholars have sought to offer interpretation of what these sneaky whisperers are. What are they? Are they individuals? Are they from the unseen realm? What are these things and how do they impact us? Many different commentaries have been given. However, one recently written article gives some insight on how this may be a reference to what we call the OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder that is talked about in today's terminologies. Now again, this is just one of the interpretations. It doesn't mean it is the only interpretation, but the article which has been presented and written about this topic does shed some light on one of the possibilities of the meaning of this verse in the light of OCD. And so we would advise the believers to do independent research and reading and to see what it is mentioned in this article and other such articles on this particular topic. But when we look at this verse of the Quran, we see that Allah is telling us and advising us to seek refuge in him from certain individuals who will engage in actions against us to try and weaken our faith, to try and put confusion within our minds. Sometimes we see that people, for example, have challenges praying or making wudu, making the ablution before prayers. And maybe multiple times they'll make the ablution because they're not satisfied that they have done it properly the first time. We see that sometimes people in this confusion of what they're doing find it difficult to carry on with daily acts of worship within Islam because they're not sure if they're doing it correctly. And so we're asked and we're told by Allah to seek refuge in this entity, which we look at the end of this chapter, that would put these evil inclinations and doubts into our head and misgivings of practical and theoretical aspects of our religion. Verse number 5, Allah goes a step further and He tells us what this person, or rather what this individual does. So previously in verse number 4, we were told to seek refuge in this individual who puts these insinuations into us. And here our Creator tells us that this individual, this entity, or these individuals, that they whisper into the hearts of the people, that they put their insinuations deep and they penetrate deep into the heart of the believer, of the human being, to make them to do certain things that perhaps they would normally not do in normal average circumstances. And obviously now that we have a better picture of who we are or what we are seeking refuge in, which is Allah, what we are seeking refuge from are these creatures, these entities who are whispering satanic thoughts into our heart. We obviously ask the question, well, what are they? Who are they? Can we see them? Can we interact with them? How do we prevent them from getting to us? And we see this in the next verse, in verse number 6, which is the last verse of Surah al-Naas. Allah answers our question of what or who these entities are that would whisper into our hearts, that would seek to confuse and mislead and misguide us away from the path of guidance. And Allah tells us that these are from the jinn and humanity. Now we know, and we'll just mention very briefly, that Allah has many different things which He has created. There's obviously the animal kingdom. There are the angels, which are the unseen creations of Allah. There are the jinn, which are also the unseen creations of Allah, but they differ from the angels in many aspects. And obviously us, the human beings. Here Allah is telling us that the jinn, which are creations which are just like us human beings, where they have communities, they have families, they follow a religion. You have jinn who are believers, some who are disbelievers. And obviously they differ from the angels because angels don't have any of those same characteristics or abilities or powers. That Allah tells us to seek refuge in Him from these jinn who He has created, but whom some of them may be those who have evil inclinations and may try to misguide you and I. And obviously the challenge comes is because we can't see them, we can't hear them, we don't have a direct way to interact with them at their plane, at their level of existence. And so therefore the only way that we can actually seek protection in Allah and ask Him for and keep away from these things is to ask Him for protection, for that Him to be our supervisor, our guide, our protector from the evil creations. The last part of the verse, however, does mention that we also seek refuge in human beings. Those people who would seek to confuse us about our religion, about our identity, about our following of the faith of Islam. And so therefore it's not only the unseen kingdom of the jinn that we have to be wary of and be careful of and to seek refuge in our Creator from them, but also from people. We have to seek refuge in Allah from people who may be around us, maybe friends, maybe family members, colleagues at work, friends at school, people maybe even who attend our same religious functions, however aren't dedicated, don't have that same maybe level of devotion or commitment, who are not there perhaps to get closer to the Creator. And so Allah tells us in this last verse that even humanity, there are some human beings who have these sorts of devilish qualities, who seek to misguide and dissuade us from the path of Islam and the ways of the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and his noble family. May God's peace and blessings be upon all of them. This concludes our very brief review of the passages of Surah al-Naas, chapter 114 of the Quran. And we remind ourselves to always seek protection and refuge in our Creator Allah from all of the evils that lurk around us, that seek to destroy us both physically and spiritually. And we ask Him for protection, that we can be His true servants and followers, and that we can implement our the teachings of the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet and his noble family in every stage of our life. Wasalam Alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.